Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. With the return of Wallace and Gromit to our screens, we welcome VFX Supervisor Howard Jones, who joins us to talk about the duo's latest caper, Vengeance Most Fowl. Howard will talk us through the visible and invisible VFX work that his team and him undertook in the film. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Howard. Hi, Howard. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello.
I'm glad that we managed to sit down and talk about Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Fowl, which has just hit Netflix. Has also had its premiere on BBC One Christmas Day. How have you found the reaction to the film? And I've already noticed as well, I'm talking off air about award nominations and being nominated for an Annie Award. How have you found the whole reaction to it and reception to the film?
It's great. I think there's been a lot of anticipation within the UK. A lot of people have grown up with Wallace and Gromit. For those that have never seen it, it is a bit of a British institution. And it's it's been lovely to see the reactions, the excitement that came up before it was broadcast, and obviously before then it was in the cinemas and got a lot of awards. And before then it was in the cinemas and it got a lot of great feedback. It's been put forward for a Golden Globe as well as Annie Award for 7 different nominations. So it's already very popular. I think it's going to be a classic, and it is a great story. It's a lovely story as well as the animation.
I think you can't go wrong with Wallace and Gromit. And me personally, I grew up with it. So it might be showing my age a little bit, but I remember recording the episodes when they were doing the sort of shorts on TV. And then on a VHS tape, you could like rip something off so you can't record over it. And obviously back in those times, VHS tapes were quite expensive, so I got in a lot of trouble for doing it, but it was worth it.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of people that actually do record it and go through almost frame by frame to see what's on it. There's a lot of jokes that are absolutely hidden, or it goes so fast you unless you know they're there, you're gonna miss them first time and possibly second and third time round. Watching it, there's lots of little Easter eggs in the background. If you look at any of the posters, there's usually jokes written all over the posters. Um, which, one of the nice things of being on set, and this goes back to when I worked on Pirates in 2012, and I had the sort of opportunity to pass the sets at the time, and you just stop and read the posters and the extra jokes that are literally up there for a few frames and they're gone. Somebody has a lot of fun writing those.
But it's funny that you mentioned like the jokes and the inside jokes and all stuff that's sort of peppered into sets. I just think as well because there's so much rich history behind Wallace and Gromit and Aardman as well that they can put these things in and people notice it. I think it's on the second Chicken Run that they put in Feathers McGrath in one of the scenes and somebody had found it.
Mm.
So I find that as always like that's quite I think maybe like a joyful thing for fans to notice. Then it's also like a oh, holy crap, like he's there. Like what else is there? Something that somebody might have missed as well.
Mm. I think I'm right in saying he actually made it into Early Man as well as a little cameraman right in the distance on a shot going into the village. And he's absolutely tiny in the shot. And also Wallace and Gromit is in Early Man in the audience at one point. So they've done it a few times. But yeah, I do like that. I mean, they actually, they write the script, they go back and they say, is it funny enough? And they go back and they do a joke pass and see what else they can add to it to make it even funnier. So it is a huge amount of emphasis on humor, British humor, and yeah, just making it fun. So it does require more than one watch to get everything. Or as we were saying earlier, get it on some kind of video recording and step through and have a look at everything.
Yeah, well, the thing is, especially like the way it's captured, going frame by frame would be quite a big thing to do as well to see what they might have peppered in. And yeah, sort of you kind of look forward to, as a fan, I think you get kind of rewarded by doing sort of many watches with it. Jumping into the beginning, how did the project come about, and what made you want to take it on? Was it a case of you just got a call back from the team to say, "Oh, we've got another one coming out. Fancy joining us?"
I've always enjoyed working with them, and going back to Pirates was my first project as a compositor and a lead. And then I did a second project, part of an extra for Pirates as a supervisor. And then I've done most of the films since, apart from Chicken Run. And no, they've just been a great company to work for. They're good fun. It's a lot of quirky people making making films, painstakingly making films. It's a real labor of love. And I just got in contact after my after previous job, and just to see if anything was coming up. And they said, "Oh, yes, hold on." And then about 6 months later, we got negotiated a start. And it was on this film. It's working with Nick Park, who I've worked with before on Early Man, and he's lovely to work with. So, I'd made the initial contact, sort of right time, right place, and yeah, they wanted me, so that was good.
I think those sort of moments as well is like when you just contact people at the right moment at the right time. It's I don't know if whatever people believe in, but it's like that weird fate where it just happens and it kind of falls into your lap. I don't know, sometimes it just works out perfectly. Even though you already have a working relationship, it's just something just out there where you think, perfect, I've got this would be perfect to do.
Yes, and also gave a chance to work with Dave Alex. Again, he's the DOP on every single one of Nick's films, and we both had the same mindset, particularly with visual effects, that we only wanted to use it where we had to, and we wanted to find photographic tricks or just normal photographic techniques to see how much we could do in camera. Because there's stuff you think, oh, okay, the easy solution for that is visual effects, but there's other stuff where you just think, well, we know we can do this differently. Even the opening shot, or one of the opening shots to Prison, we'd filmed a row of houses. And even though we're working at model scale, that still took up a huge studio. So we had to move the houses around, repeat the same shot several times, and then stitched it together so that we could then project it onto a simple white, just a normal white screen, like an old projector system, so that we could get the reflections in the rooftop of the car rather than going in and replacing it all or adding it all in post. We just went out of our way to try and do that in camera. So it was a very, very sort of filmic way of doing something that, these days you might do with a really expensive LED screen system.
Looking
Yeah.
at something where, because you're collaborating with so many people, because this is one thing that kind of was on my mind when sort of researching and reading up on certain things was with visual, like I always thought because it's animation and especially in this sort of case, it's claymation rather than what's it called, like a animation on a everything sort of done on computers and drawn out in a way, but with stop motion, they have to sort of do various bits and bobs differently compared to like a traditional, I don't want to say cartoon, but sort of
You mean sort of
computer animation.
cell animation?
Yes, thank you. That's the word I was
Yes.
looking for. But I was curious to know what the difference was working on a live action compared to an animation film when it came to VFX, because I thought you could kind of just cheat it in a way, but there seems to be a lot more to it in terms of how much it feels like you're working on it's like the principles are the same, but it's on a smaller scale, but you still have to be just as creative as you would be on a location or in a much larger soundstage.
Yes, you have more time to think about it, but at the same time, they are filming 25 scenes at the same time or shots at the same time. So you are constantly going between one unit to the next unit. And one shot could be from the beginning of the film, one shot could be from the middle, and one shot could be near the end. And you've got to switch into your notes as to what we're doing on particular shots, and everyone's working it out because even though we have what are called PPMs, pre-production meetings, where we go through the storyboards and work out all the technical issues and get the creative brief. Once you start putting everything up and putting it into place, and you realize the issues with, say, the scale, because animators are a certain size, they're human size, and everything else is like a fifth to a sixth of human size. That they've got to be able to get in there with their hands, to physically animate. So on the set, you've got to think, well, okay, the set's always designed to be able to be split in half so they can get in one half and put the other half in, and they get in the other half of the set. So you've got to think about all of those technical practice or those practical aspects of a physical filming technique, of an animation technique. And of course, then you're also looking at scale all the time. So it's how do you get the scale correct and how do you make it look big, and the choice of lenses and everything. And then the other side, particularly in this film, the emphasis really was to let the animators get on with it, because you can put so many visual effects passes. I'll come back to passes in a minute if you like, but you can put in so many visual effects passes that the animator presses a button and then like 6, 7 minutes later, he's allowed to do or she's allowed to do the next frame. And really, they want to just be able to click a button, get on with it, get the next frame, click a button, and go to the next frame. So a lot of the emphasis we had as well was to keep it as simple as possible, in terms of visual effects requirements, and let the animators be creative and get on with it. And I think it shows in in the film itself that they did enjoy making this film. So what are the differences between this and live action is obviously the speed that things are filmed at. But yes, the practicalities of lighting, of set access, of what passes we need are very similar. Even on a film set, the last thing you want to do is hold up the filming any more than you need to, because it's expensive. People want to get on with it. Actors want to be able to act. Directors want to be able to direct, and the ADs want the whole thing to be done on time. So on a film set, you've got to be practical, pragmatic, and on this as well, you've got to be pragmatic. You really want to just let people get on with it. Let the creative people be creative. Then, and then, one of the aspects of visual effects or animation is that you do have the ability these days to do various passes. And by that, I mean, you don't have to have all the lights on at the same time. You can have a key light on, followed by a fill light, and they all just get turned on and off automatically, and it's completely repeatable. So that means, from a visual effects point of view, you can separate out, say, the green screen from the foreground, which allows you to do what's called a silhouette pass. And it means that you've got a lot more control over how you key it. Something you definitely can't do on a real live shoot. Something you definitely can't do on a live shoot, should I say. So there's other aspects that are different to live action, just things that, because it's a still frame process, and in this case, a claymation process, you just can do other stuff. Even the equivalent in CG would be all your multiple passes that you can spit out from the renderer. But these were programmed lighting that the software is very clever. They press the button to do it, and it will cycle through a set of light states depending on what's required. Quite often, the DOP would want different light states. Particularly in this film, you weren't sure towards the ending quite what time of day it was going to be at what point. So we separated out a few different lights so that we could keep it sort of more early morning to dawn, depending on how Nick and Merlin wanted it to progress. Because we could have been at dawn earlier in the end sequence, but we really wanted to keep dawn to right at the end when the reveal happens. And so up to that point, it's just that pre-dawn kind of lighting. So those are kind of extras that you don't get on light filming that you can do. But otherwise, yeah, the principles are pretty much the same.
I feel like there's a lot to sort of take in from that answer because even though stuff is the same, it feels like a lot of some other aspects are different and maybe slightly easier than live action. So when you're talking about the sort of lighting part of the key light and being able to extract certain parts, that sounds really actually quite fascinating because it feels like you're kind of taking instead of having, I guess the way I could picture it is like instead of having the whole frame on a normal film, you could just have like this more of a cutout for you guys to work in and play around with.
Yeah, there's there's a lot of advantages, say, to stop motion with digital cameras these days and with programmable lighting desks. And there's a lot of stuff that Aardman have built themselves and innovated themselves over the years. So it's all been created and designed to really benefit stop frame animation, claymation. They've been able to develop it, so it's a fine-tuned machine. And they say the advantages to visual effects are enormous, but you just be careful you don't abuse it. You don't want to be saying, "Oh, we'll have this, this, and this, and this in case we need it." You really just want to take what you need. But one of the good things that is quite different to live action, and it's a shame you can't do it in live action, is just the ability to have the green screen or the key screen turned off when you're doing the main action, and then turn it off, or turn it on, and turn all the other lights off, so you get a sort of a silhouette of your foreground, but a perfectly good, clean blue screen behind. And develop the technique a little bit further, where for the key screen itself, we just made it a mid-gray. So when the action's happening or the foreground's being filmed, they've got a mid-gray background, a neutral background. And then when we come to do the silhouette pass, we switched it back to a blue or a green key, depending on the bit of kit that we had at the time. So you remove all of the technical issues of blue spill or green spill in the foreground. So it just becomes a question of balancing up your blacks and whites on your edges, which takes out a lot of the problems of live action. Pulling the keys has always only been the beginning of a key screen technique. It's all the regrading and it's all the edges that you spend ages just getting rid of that last little bit of color that makes it look stuck on. So this sort of the silhouette technique and these abilities to do different passes does open up a huge amount of possibilities within visual effects. But like I said, a bit more towards CG and what you can get out of CG.
I'm trying to picture some of it because it's all different to what I sort of kind of usually see on like a behind the scenes on a live action. But then it feels very slightly simplified, maybe is probably the right word to say compared to live action. But then also it's fascinating to hear about where you say about the blue or green screen overspill, well, then you have to fill it in. It's really sort of quite something, really, that you guys, what you guys are working on and how what's being captured at the time and then worked on to what you see in the final film. Because that's just, yeah, it's just something that's just, I guess it's movie magic in its own way and just how seamless it looks as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think, the technology's grown, or the post-technology visual effects has grown sort of in parallel in this sort of case with the LED lighting and all the other techniques that allow you to do more, even on a live set. You've got all these abilities to control your lighting in a way that you couldn't have done 30 years ago or 40 years ago. So, or program it in a way that you couldn't have done, a long time ago. So technology seems to have sort of kept pace with what is. So the technology has kind of enhanced what is actually quite an old technique. Claymation goes right back to the beginning of cinema. And in terms of the technique itself, it hasn't really changed. You've got something that you can animate, you move at a tiny fraction each frame, and you record that onto whatever medium. Obviously, in the past, it used to be film. Digital cameras have brought a whole set of advantages to this technique, and as has computers and everything, because you can immediately play back your animation. You can see what it's going to play like. You can cut back if the action isn't quite right. You can come back the next day. You can cut back, say, 10 frames or 20 frames into the middle of the animation, and brilliantly, the animators can pick it up and go with it. And the lighting's matched because it's all controlled. LED lighting's all controlled, through the software, Dragon software, and just through the machines and everything, all the electronics and everything that they've built over the years. It's the same with the cameras. The cameras will, for a camera move, they're controlled and they move a specific amount every single frame. So if you do have to cut back, the camera will go back to the correct position for that frame. So if you've got a slow track in or a fast move, you will get back to the position of the camera. So pickups and changes and all the rest of it are so much, I won't say, well, I'm going to say easier, but that's probably very condescending and incorrect. but it's a lot easier than it would have been in the past, or a lot more responsive and easier to deal with. And of course, in the past, I mean, say the original Chicken Run, visual effects were pretty much unaffordable. So they were really working to make sure that they didn't need to do any cleanup. They didn't need to do the sort of stuff that we take for granted these days. But things have moved on. Picture quality's changed. TV sets are bigger. Cinemas, well, they're probably about the same size as they used to be, but the images on those is new compared to film. Some prefer film, some prefer digital. I personally like both, and it's just grown up. But so the basic technique goes all the way back. It's not changed. It's a single move, tiny move every other frame in this case. And also it does the thing, the animation it does is posed in that some animation, some claymation maybe more on the American side is smooth. So it looks like what you could make in CG, goes from one leg position to the other leg position, and it behaves in a way that it would do if you were walking. Whereas with Aardman, each frame is posed almost so that you could just take any single frame from all of it and you got an exciting kind of dynamic image. But those posed positions give the illusion of movement from one thing to the next, rather than sort of the more natural kind of real position of the puppets. And it is one of the two kind of basic techniques of animation. I'm not an animator, so apologies to animators if I've said that wrong. But you get the sort of smooth motion, and you get posed animation. So if you step through frame by frame on a scene, you'll see that they are jumping in ways that you wouldn't expect necessarily would work as a single set, single frames. You think, well, how's that give the illusion of the particular movement? But it does, and that's very much the core of how Aardman animate.
I think again that just shows the sort of movie magic, and then also the care and that Aardman take in what they do, and how different it is in terms of the way normal films get made, or just how animation might get made. And I guess as like audience members as well, with stuff like Wallace and Gromit and Chicken Run and so on, is that you're just enthralled by it, really. And I don't think ever you think about it as like oh, this was done in claymation and this was done in this another sort of format, so that actually it works in its own way and actually creates that unique look without you actually realizing that you're watching it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a it's a particular technique in filming that is beautiful in its own right. I think it's something with visual effects that we have to make sure we respect, because you could clean it up so that it almost looks like CG, but that's not particularly this film. That's not what it's about. It's very much a puppet film. It's very much an hand animated film. And even at the outset, it's almost the very first thing that Nick said at our very first production meeting was, this is a claymation film, and we're embracing that genre and the beauty of it. So, the classic example is they talk about the fingerprints in the clay. It's very important to them that all of that hand craft is visible on the screen. So we don't clean it up. We might clean out something that pops on, like a hair or a bit of dirt, pops on a few frames and pops off. But generally, the rule I've always worked with is, if it's not distracting and it's not popping on and off, then we leave it in there, so that you just know it's handmade. There is no CG Norbot in this film. There's no CG Wallace or Gromit. The only exception for CG is the legs under the van as it's driving off, because it was just not possible to animate it. Even when we've got the Norbot army, when we first see the Norbot army walking down or marching down the corridor, we developed a filming technique, which was the first time it's been used, where we animated the first four puppets, and then we moved them back using motion control. We moved them back into different positions in the set, in that animation pose, so that they marched absolutely in sync. But that way we could have row upon row upon row of Norbots but lit by the correct part of the set because it's darker at the back of the set. It's, there's light coming through the front door. So a green screen technique where we just put them on green screen and just repeat them would never have worked. So this was so just a different approach to it that allowed us to keep it in camera. I say keep it in camera, it still had to be cut out and had to be layered up, but at least the puppet animation was real on set and each puppet was in the correct or in the right position.
So going back to what you're just saying as well about the movement of the legs and how having to work that in for to animate that for VFX. I think that's again so fascinating how that's done because I reckon no one would probably notice that. They probably thought that somebody probably spent a number of days just going back and forth with the legs and not realizing. Because again, that's how seamless something like that would look.
Mm.
But then that's also the sort of tricks that you would have to use in making an animation film because you mentioned earlier about not wanting to rely on VFX, but when you have to sort of integrate it more into what you're doing, I guess there's a way of that you need to do it in a kind of clever way, but then also make it as seamless as possible so no one notices that you guys have used it.
Yeah, it's extremely important that you're not taking out of the film with any of the visual effects, the visible visual effects, and we can talk about the invisible in a bit, but the visible visual effects, it's important that it looks like it's part of that world. The example with the legs, we talked in our production meeting the practicalities of how you would animate it, and it would have been possible to animate it, but it would have been impractical to animate it for real. So just because of the closeness of them, the amount of rigging that would be required and the access for the animator. So it just seemed better that for that particular shot we put in CG legs. Otherwise, as I say, there's no CG characters at all throughout this film. We really wanted to make sure it's something that was physical throughout.
Isn't that something that's quite amazing as well, that there's no CG characters? And I know that again, that is also the way that they wanted to create the film, but it's the fact that they could easily do it probably, but decide not to. And again, that's probably the reason why that's the sort of magic of it all. But it's just, yeah, amazing how they don't have anything like that. I know other than the little bits of like tidy ups if there's something there. But yeah, I can't believe that sometimes.
That was the ethos that we talked about at the very beginning. Everything had to be practical as far as possible, as far as practical, without wanting to be too corny with a joke. It was important to all of us that it was a claymation film. We embraced the beauty and the idiosyncrasies of that genre.
Just sort of going on with visible visual effects and then sort of hidden side. What would be some examples of visual effects that us as audience members would see and would kind of stand out in its own way? And how do you go about integrating that into the film?
The most obvious examples would be the water shots. You can animate water, but it's very stylized. It would be sort of cling film or cellophane of some sort, or those sort of techniques, but they didn't lend themselves to the visuals of this particular film. They would look at the wrong scale, or at least they'd look at a particular scale. And we really wanted to make the film look big. We wanted the aqueduct sequence to look huge. We didn't want it to look like a miniature. So water's the most obvious water's the most obvious example of something that is extremely hard, or in this case would have been impractical to film, and would have been of the wrong style. So it took a while to get the right kind of water. If we went too big with the water itself so that it was absolutely real scale, then it made the barges look miniature. So it was very important we got the scale of the water right. It fitted in with the scale of the puppets, but still added scale to it. So we don't look like we're at 1/5 human size. We still look like we're on a big aqueduct, we're in a big canal, but at the same time, the water's not out of scale with the puppets. So it's quite a tricky sort of starting point to get that integration correct. But it's not just about comping it in correctly, technically get it in. It was much more about how do we get the two to marry up. Otherwise, you could go back as much as I like J90 and Thunderbirds, you'd end up looking like Thunderbirds, where you've got scale of water or fire or the rest of it is different to what you believe the scale of the world is. And so we wanted to really marry the two, and we wanted to make it feel big. We wanted to make it feel epic. We wanted the valley to feel huge and the aqueduct to feel huge. Other examples of visual effects that are visible is the flamethrower when they're trying to get Wallace to fall asleep, and then fog. There's a lot of fog in a chase and everything, and that's not something that you can practically film in stop frame. So again, with the fog, we had to make sure it felt in keeping with the environment they're in, but we also wanted to make it add atmosphere, literally make it add atmosphere to the shot, make it feel that the streets are big, make it feel that the world we're in is a believable scale. And then we got, things like the barge explosion, deliberately over the top. And actually, when I saw it in the cinema, I got quite a big laugh. We deliberately didn't go absolutely full on with the fire to make it look like fire, which I've done in the past where we've mixed real fire into CG explosions to sort of add that extra realism. We deliberately didn't do that, but we took it to a point where it felt like it could be real, but just was just short of being photoreal. And also different to the kind of fire and smoke that you get in a lot of cell animation, where it's a particular kind of style and quite fluffy. We wanted it to kind of look real, but not quite. So not quite hyper real, not quite photoreal, somewhere between the two. So that's the visible stuff. The other visible stuff is all the skies. Skies are DMPs painted by Jay out in Australia. I hope I got a name right. And we work a lot with those DMPs and grade them just so they fitted with the lighting that Dave Alex put in. So every single sky is a digital matte painting, comped in with no exceptions. And with all of these things, the water, the fire, the skies, they're art directed by Nick and Merlin. So the water had to do specific stuff. It wasn't just, oh, what would it happen if the barge did this as it moves along? It's how exciting do we want the water? How much is it moving the water? Where are things splashing? So, example, when it comes out of the boatyard and Feathers has put outboard motors onto the barge, how much water is sprayed off to one side, how many objects are landing to the left of the barge, the timing of them, are they distracting? Are they looking unreal? Are they irritating, or are they right? So there's a lot of stuff that is done as art directed, and that's on every single shot. I mean that's true across the entire film. Everything is thought about, every single position of furniture, the look of the set. I mean, Matt Perry does an amazing job in his team of just getting amazing sets put in, but also just adding extra realism, dirt, and wearing things down, making it look worn so it doesn't look like it's a brand new sofa, or it doesn't look like a brand new table. They distress everything to sort of make it fit in. So every single aspect, every single frame is thought about. And even if it's the same set, they go to a different camera angle, they'll reposition the furniture just enough to make it look more interesting and more photographic. And it's no exception with the CG. Every single thing was thought about. How did the fog move? How did the fire happen? How silly could we make the fire extinct? The flamethrower. How silly could we make the explosion? Silly is probably the wrong word, but was there humour that we could add through the visual effects into the film? And there are bits where I've heard people laughing at, should I say, with, not at the visual effects, along with the visual effects, because they have added an extra bit of humour. So the most obvious is the flamethrower. The most obvious example is the flamethrower in terms of how over the top can we make it to make it funny.
Again, I think it's quite fascinating to hear what you guys do on set as well and how that's incorporated into it. It's funny as well, like the fire side of it, where you've kind of mixed a bit of fire into your work, because I can imagine as well, like fire and clay probably do not work best together. However, it's probably obviously done safely, but it's still quite fascinating with how you can incorporate it in what you're doing. And then also the fact that something like simple as water as well. I think I had a conversation like this with a production designer about how VFX water was added into a live action film, and it's funny how you can't really control water, but they can. But then when you're in visual effects, you can do whatever you want with it. But then with something on this sort of scale, it must be so much more intricate knowing that it's going to be 1/10 of actually what we're doing.
Yes, it just takes time as well. I mean, with the one advantage of puppet frame animation is that you do have time to try different ideas even before the animation's taken place. So we spend a lot of time discussing what type of barge water, what color it's going to be, how dirty is it, how much scum are we going to add around the edge of it to sort of help blend it in. It does that. There's lots of dialogue. There's lots of thought that goes into it, and there's a lot of R&D as well. We try different looks. We see if it's going to work, if it's too real, if it's not. If it is a bit real, what can we do to sort of close it off? There's a shot of a barge traveling along, and the water just felt a little too the expanse of the water felt too big. In other words, it felt like they were on a lake as opposed to a sort of a narrower canal. So we just put a tiny bit of canal in the top left-hand corner, and that closed the whole thing off, and it changed the scale. So there's lots of subtle things like that that we've done just to really make it fit.
Yeah. And I can imagine the R&D process could be quite fun with it and probably slightly frustrating as well because you'll have moments where you could be on the cusp of it or you might not be on the cusp of it, but it still would be fun sort of part to play before you start shooting. We're slowly sort of running out of time and I've got three more questions, if
Okay.
that's all right. You mentioned earlier about working with the DOP, Dave Alex Riddit, and
Yeah.
how you sort of were talking about the collaboration process. What's your collaboration process with other departments such as production design or even sound department?
We all get together in a room with the exception of sound to all be on the same page and all try and help each other how we're going to film this. So just going back to what the pre-production meetings are, we've got the storyboards, the final storyboards for the sequence, and they do change a lot up until the point we're going to film, and then they're locked. So there's the art department, there's visual effects, there's DOP, there's puppets, there's all the relevant parties in that room, all working together to figure out the best way to film it, most practical way, but also the way that's going to give the right results. So there is a constant dialogue between all the departments. I don't have any real say, or I wouldn't have had any real say in what the art department has come up with and how it's going to look, apart from if you could do this, it's going to make our lives easier, or we'll need to be able to add this to it so that we can practically remove it or change it. I mean, the a good example probably is submarine shots. And how do you get a submarine running down a great big sewer in a way that visual effects can clean it up afterwards? And we're just very careful with simple stuff, but we're very careful, like, well, okay, we're filming from this side. We need a pole that's holding the submarine on the other side, so that we're not or the other side of the camera, so you don't have the pole between the camera and the I was going to say puppet, but in this case, the submarine. So you make sure that you got the camera, submarine, and then the contraptions that are holding it in place, the rigging that's holding it in place is beyond that. So we can cut round and do it. And then have to say, well, okay, well, then we need to be able to go back and do passes on the clean plate where there's no submarine. So we've got something to paint back with. So the collaboration is constant, and you want everyone to collaborate together. And at this bit film, on this film, everyone did. It was a great experience. Everyone was rooting for the same result. I'd just like to touch on some of the invisible stuff we've done. So some of the other stuff we've done that the audience shouldn't see is obviously the invisible effects. And the department that's got the most invisible work in there is the rigging department, because you never see the effort and the work that goes in to from the rigging department just to hold a puppet in place. If it leaps into the air, it's got to be held in place by a bit of rigging. We worked very closely together to make sure rigging was as sensible as possible in terms of its positioning, in terms of what we would need to do afterwards, but also working the other way around. They wanted to be able to do certain things, and I said that's not a problem. We can clean it up throughout. Just a access to the internal structure of the puppets. There's an armature and they need to be able to tighten up and loosen certain joints. And so how could they do that? And there's just tiny little holes in the silicon that allows a screwdriver or probably a Allen key to get in there and loosen it. And it was like, that's fine, we'll clean it up because that made their life a lot easier. But the rigging that they put in, some of the stuff that's gone into this is absolutely amazing. And you never see any of it. So that's one of the things that, or one of the main things that we do to get rid of. So that's one of the main things we do is to take all their lovely work and get rid of it. So I just wanted to give them a shout out because it's a huge amount of effort they put in. And then one of the other things we do in terms of the interdepartmental sort of working is practically what can we film in one go. Animators can only animate so many puppets in one go before their head would explode. So we have to take into account that they might be able to animate 6, 7 puppets, and that's the maximum for them to be able to concentrate on the movement and everything. So they work in different areas of the set, and we know we're going to join them, and we know with working with DOP how we're going to light it, how we're going to make sure it's repeatable, how we know we're going to be able to get our joins in there in post. And then also what does need to be filmed on green screen. What would make sense if we film it on green screen as opposed to so still practical in terms of it's real puppets, but they may need layering for whatever reason. As you get to the end of the film, where there's a lot of stuff happening at the same time, sometimes you haven't got access to the background because that's on another set, on another unit, and it's already being used for another shot. So rather than hold off this shot until that's available, sometimes we just go to blue screen or green key screen just to make it just to make the schedule work better so that we'll add that background in afterwards. As an interior, bit of interior hallway just wasn't available for the pullout of Wallace when he has the mob in front of him. So that's he's got green screen behind him, and then we filmed the interior at a later date. So there is a lot of stuff like that that is invisible that helps the flow of the production, helps the creative side of things moving, helps the creative side of the animators, keeps the creative juices flowing. But you're not, you don't want to know that we've done that in visually. We don't want to give anything away. You don't want to look at something and go, oh yeah, look, there's a tiny bit of rig, or there's a bit of wire that we're not supposed to see. We go through really painstakingly and hopefully we've caught every single piece and there's nothing left in the film. I certainly haven't seen anything that's caught my eye since, but we really want to make sure that there's nothing distracting from the story in terms of rigs or dirt or anything. So there's a lot of invisible work with the visual effects just to achieve that.
I think as well, like that's the sort of beauty of your work as well. That when you're so I guess firstly it's like the collaboration process and how making sure they all pull in the same direction, just like any film, really. But then also it probably takes a little bit extra care and detail because you're working with puppets and claymation, and how are we going to get the best out of your team if they can't do certain things? But then it's making sure that everything's correct as well, which I find is quite interesting and fascinating in what's being done and what's being made.
Mm.
And then also when you talk about the invisible work in itself is fascinating because, as you said, you don't think you've seen anything, but then there's certain things that might be hidden away that people have worked on and done really well. And I was mentioning about the whole rigging team as well. That's something that's not really popped into my head about how do you hide the lights and the lighting of the whole set for something like this, and then get away with it without people actually realizing what's happening.
There's a lot of dialogue in that area, particularly with rigging, because practically we don't want shadows of things that we're going to remove falling over puppets or falling over areas that would make it really hard to remove. So working closely with the rigging department, they're always great at being very sensitive to making sure that they weren't making everybody's lives harder by having rigs creating shadows. And then obviously with lighting, they had to light around the rig. Practical thing, if you got someone suspended, there's all the puppets jumping in, there's all the Norbots leaping on their little scooters and flying into the air. And that requires a bar requires one of two things, either a pole holding them up from beneath, or it requires a bar above and them being suspended from above. And both cast shadows. So the one from above can cast a shadow across the tops of puppets and cause all sorts of problems. But, the rigging partner was brilliant in making sure that it didn't. And then with lighting, they were brilliant in making sure that it didn't as well. And of course, then we do the passes afterwards that allow us to clean it up. So just going back to your question about cooperation, all of the areas need to come together to make sure that this works. You go back to Chicken Run, the first Chicken Run in the previous films, rigging was just hidden. It had to be hidden, but that meant they couldn't do certain things that they can do these days. So they just hid stuff behind, or puppets, or behind buildings, or put grass in front, or whatever, just so that you couldn't see the rigs. But these days, with visual effects, being able to clean it up, it just opens up all sorts of other opportunities in terms of what you can do with the animation.
Again, amazing how interesting that can be done, right? And how things have changed in general with what people can achieve and what they wanted to do in their productions and how they hide things as well. For my final question, what was your favorite scene to work on?
Oh, gotta think about that. I think my favorite sequence would be the aqueduct, the final bit, because that's where we really wanted to add scale to the whole world. We wanted it to feel like a big aqueduct. We wanted to put Atmos in. The aqueduct itself is a combination of CG and practical to be able to create the extra height. We played with height on the set, that if we put the aqueduct's not in the same height throughout, sometimes it's higher than it should be, just to create a better sense of vertigo. So I think that was my favorite sequence, because visually it's just exciting. We wanted you to feel that if he's going to fall, he's going to fall, and not do very well when he landed. So it was a good combination. It was of different scale sets of CG, puppets, how we combine it, and there's a lot of different elements in there, how we actually put that together. I won't have time to go into all the different scales and all the different breakdowns of each shot, but none of that is filmed in one go. That's all sorts of different bits put together, different scale sets, and even, not in the physical same place, in different parts of the building. So yeah, that would be my favorite. Second to that is I do really like the flamethrower, because that is just super silly.
Solid choices. I think you can probably it was a lot of fun making those scenes and then kind of quite rewarding watching them back and just being like, oof, those probably were tough times, but they look incredible.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. It none of that stuff's easy. If it was easy, it probably wouldn't look so good. Um, so yeah, it was enjoyable. I mean, the whole show was enjoyable. I really loved working on it.
I'm only slightly jealous of you being able to work with on a Wallace and Gromit. Howard, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Fowl is streaming now on Netflix. Go out and watch Howard and his team's work and enjoy it. Thank you again, Howard.
Thank you very much.
You
Take care.
take care and bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.